What was sort of really exciting for me this morning is that you came in and I gave you this very lengthy email, and to watch you work was fascinating. To see a passionate, driven, really knowledgeable expert sit down and to see you making notes and how focused and driven you were was just very exciting to watch.
Well, it's just that first I looked at it and I was like, okay, this is 3 pages. If I read through this, we won't make it, because I get in here like 5 minutes before the show.
I mean, I gave you minutes.
But then once I started reading it, I noticed that there's just some key things, and I think this parent, this dad who's written in, just wants a little bit of advice in terms of organizing the things he has to do, and I think, so then I said to you, actually I think I can help, so let me just respond to some of this.
And a little background, so this email came in and it's a lengthy 3-page email, so we're not going to read the whole thing to you, but a parent who is living in Alabama asked for some advice about a 4-year-old child, correct?
4-year-old child, that's right, and I guess the child had been in a special needs preschool for about a year but didn't really make progress.
And does not yet have an autism diagnosis, correct?
Right, that's right. And they are about to get a diagnosis, I believe, coming up in July. And it sounds like they will have insurance coverage for a full ABA program.
If in fact they get that.
I wasn't aware that Alabama actually has that. But
I wasn't, but you know, I guess it depends on your individual insurance company.
Well, yeah, I just didn't realize that Alabama is already one of the mandated states. So.
And I'll have to check on that to make sure of that.
It sounds like it is.
Okay, and so, but that will be dependent upon them getting a diagnosis. And if the diagnosis is happening on July 1st, then can we assume that the new criteria would be in use for that, or we don't want to assume?
That's a good point. Probably. I mean, if it's Alabama, so I'm not sure how. We haven't really even started using it here yet, just because I think most of us are waiting for the actual manual to come out.
Yeah.
And it hasn't come out yet. It was supposed to be released in May, but it hasn't been printed yet. So, but Amazon we've all pre-ordered.
Right.
So it should be coming out any minute now.
Okay.
And I would imagine that by July, you're looking at the new criteria.
Okay.
And that's going to be an interesting challenge for everyone as well, just really because the title will change, you know, ASD, and I don't know how insurance, I'm assuming insurance companies will just go ahead and cover with an ASD diagnosis.
Well, and that was a part of the original lawmaking that they kind of thought ahead, but it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes down.
Right.
Okay, so in looking at this, if we pull out some salient points for this parent.
Just a few things, because the parent refers to the fact that they're in Alabama and that they expect to have a long wait time or not sure where they're going to get services and all that. So, you know, that's one of the things where I feel like after you get the diagnosis, first of all, I always tell people, if you'd like to come here and to California, I'm happy to do your assessment and diagnosis. So that's not a problem. I can actually do that in multiple other states that I'm licensed as well, but here is where I have my assessment team and all the tests, and so we can administer tests, and I can easily do a 2-hour assessment or diagnosis with you myself.
And I can tell you that, you know, you've said that before, and you've done that. Parents that have heard that on the show have said, okay, so Dr. Granpeesheh, I'm coming, do you mean it? And she has meant it and followed through on it, which is kind of incredible.
The thing is, though, that it sounds like this child already has an appointment July 1st, and if I was to get an appointment in right now, it would be more like, I don't know, October or something. So it's better to get the diagnosis. And then in terms of getting services, I feel that if you don't have a quality ABA provider out there, we will help you with that. But that's our remote services, and we can help with that because we have supervisors who will be going to the southern states, everywhere, and they will hire and train local people so that the insurance will cover your services through us, and the supervisor will come back and forth and will also watch the services on Skype or something similar to Skype, and we'll be able to guide. So we've done that a lot for insurance companies. We continue to do that. We have programs that have run in that fashion for 2, 3, 4 years. I have recovered kids from those types of what we used to call workshops, and now they're called remote services. So that is one area that CARD could help you.
Okay.
And we're just about to open an office, I think in hopefully 2 months or so, in the Baton Rouge area.
Really?
So we will be in that general area and able to help. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if your insurance, if you are covered, your insurance is not just going to pay for direct ABA, they will also pay for assessments. Because there's some mention of, I'm not sure we can afford any tests or treatments. Your insurance first pays for assessments, and then will then based on the assessments, reports are written and recommendations are made on the hours of therapy that your child would benefit from. So you should get all of that from your insurance. Now, I'm talking psychological as well as medical.
Right.
And especially because your diagnosis is in July, that's kind of a good thing, because the way that you diagnose with the new criteria, the medical issues become, I don't want to say like more obvious, but they're part of the diagnosis. You mention the medical issues, and your child certainly does have a lot of medical issues. So it would be very important, extremely important, that the medical issues are written in the report when the initial diagnosis is done.
Okay.
And the way that we diagnose, there's 5 axes. So the first axis is where you put the autism diagnosis. The second axis, second is sort of more like chronic long-term type personality disorders. Third axis is medical disorders.
Okay.
So, and a lot of psychologists, when they diagnose, they just ignore the whole 5-axis thing. But if you're using insurance, you have to use the 5-axis.
Okay.
And therefore, on the third axis, which is just the third line, the person diagnosing would want to list a lot of these medical issues that you've listed here. And just so you know, most insurance companies, when they see additional medical issues, will fund higher. So this is an important thing for you to do. The next thing is just reading some of the symptoms that you mentioned, like had recurring ear infections, has tubes in now, you know, wakes up yelling, laughing, running around in the middle of the night. Those types of symptoms would alert me to want to test for yeast. Because, and it's just reading some other things as well, it sounds like there's you also have recurring yeast rashes, and
there's eczema, there's laughing.
Eczema, there's all the loose stools and all this sort of stuff. And really, you need to have someone who's more of an expert in the field of autism do testing. You definitely have a large number of allergic foods that you've listed here for your child, and when you have that many allergies, or what comes up on an allergy test that's positive, that doesn't really mean that your child's allergic to these things. It means that your child's immune system is overreacting, and that makes a lot of sense, because on another page you had written that he had normal progression until about 18 months. And a lot of times our kids start to go into that sort of hyperimmune reaction phase around that time, just because they're immunized. And not that the immunization is causing the autism, but the immunization is affecting your child's immune system.
Right.
You know, when we get immunized, of course, the concept is we're going to give you a very small amount of the disease, whatever it is.
Right.
At 18 months is the MMRs, actually, mumps, measles, and rubella. And that is supposed to increase your child's immune reaction to those particular things, so that your child, when exposed in the future, won't catch them.
Right.
Sometimes with kids, what happens is it just dysregulates their entire immune system, and they start to react to everything.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's possible in your case because of all the other things that you've written here. So I would really recommend that you look on the website for MAPS, M-A-P-S, and MAPS.
And it's medmaps.org.
Okay, great.
medmaps.org.
Terrific. And that's sort of the replacement for what used to be called the Autism Research Institute, or DAN Doctors. And it's, I guess the doctor who founded it is Dr. Dan Rosignol, and he's very good. He's out here, I think, in California now, but they have physicians all over the country who've gone through their training, and sometimes the physicians will tend to do things that are not necessarily, you know, scientific background or those types of things. But having said that, these are the guys that really understand autism, and what they're trying to do is not that they're trying to do unscientific things. They're trying to go above and beyond in order to figure this thing out.
Right.
Really, they're trying to push the borders and just like figure out what your child needs. I can tell you right now that a traditional allergist or a traditional pediatrician will not deal with all these things.
Right.
And there's so many things happening here that are very typical of a child whose immune reaction is reacting, let's say, that this is the typical thing that our MAPS doctors do deal with. And so I would really, those are the things I can suggest. The only other thing, so I would say, you know, first of all, get a diagnosis, which any of the MAPS doctors who are pediatricians should be able to diagnose as well, although you do have an appointment. So make sure you get that. Contact a MAPS physician, get a series of tests done, and you're going to be asking for tests to identify yeast. And I read that you've changed the diet, but I'm not sure what you've changed it to. But anyway, you will need to talk to also a nutritionist. And, you know, we've had, of course, Julie Matthews on this show a few times.
She's amazing.
Julie is fabulous. I don't know if she can reach out to you in Alabama. You may want to contact Julie anyway and see what help she can offer.
She does consultation around the world.
Terrific.
So her website is nourishinghope.com.
Great.
So you can go there.
So we have the MAPS website and we have Nourishing Hope.
Yes.
And so those two things will kind of help stabilize the medical a little bit. As far as the behavioral stuff, when you have this much these many medical issues going on, the child's not really feeling all that well. There's a lot of, you know, stuff going on inside, and so I wouldn't want to expect him right now to calm down right away until you get some of the medical issues under control. There is some behavioral stuff happening, which is sort of attention seeking and yelling and banging for attention and so on. And you know, that's bound to happen until you get a very good behavioral program in the house. The main thing is that you wrote he does well with the PEC system. Please infuse his entire life with the PEC system. Put it everywhere, in every environment. Make sure he has a little PEC's book with him, or if he's able to, a lot of our kids now transfer just to the iPad. And we put the Proloquo on there, and it just allows them to go that direction. But the more he can use his PEC system to communicate his needs, the lower these behaviors will be. So when we yell or scream or something, we want to escape a situation, you've listed some of those, or we want to gain attention and so on. If it's just as easy or easier to use a PEC system, and actually the PEC system becomes effective, like you pick something and someone gives it to you, and what you pick could be a break, I want to do something else, any of those things, the PEC system will replace the behavior. So this is the best I can do right now. You've listed some pretty good reinforcers. He likes swinging and all that sort of stuff, and so I would say you really need to, and you know, and you've written that he's a gentle and sweet kid, so let me tell you for sure, if he's doing all these other behaviors, he's not feeling well. So, you know, let's try to get him feeling better, and then hopefully we get a good behavioral program in place, and that'll take care of things. He is very young, so the good thing with that is that, you know, you still have a lot of good opportunity ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Just hang in there. It's really tough. I can understand reading all of this. It's just, it's one on top of another, and it's chaos. I can totally get it.
And then I usually recommend for people who, when they're in that in-between phase, while they're waiting for assessments and waiting to start services, I encourage them to do IBT training.
That's right.
Get as educated as you can, because you can be doing it in little increments, a half hour here, an hour there. That's Institute for Behavior Training. It will pay off.
And it's so affordable, you know, $10 or $12.
It's as low as $7.50 for some of the trainings.
Right. And once you go on there, you'll go in the parent section, and there's a ton of different trainings. And, you know, you just purchase one, and then you can go through it. And it's a video, and it's, you know, one of our senior supervisors, actually, our training group, the IBT training group, is everyone very, very, very senior at CARD. So they've been with me for, gosh, almost 20 years, some of these guys. So they're very experienced, and they know what they're talking about. They're all behavior analysts, and they all understand the interaction, I guess, of sensory issues and medical issues with behavior. So yeah, please do access IBT. It helps a lot when you understand.
Very targeted to different topics.
Very targeted, right.
So that when you're thinking, okay, what do I do about a tantrum? And you go in and somebody wants to talk to you about ABA, and sometimes they start with something else other than how do I deal with a tantrum. These are really targeted, so that if you're having issues with something, you can say, all right, this is where I need to start. And it allows you to come in there. I think they're wonderful.
Thank you.
A lot of times they were filming them here in the studio, and so I would be outside in the control room, and I hated to go pick up my child from school, who I adore and can't wait to see, but I was hanging on the edge of my chair listening as they were filming to the great information that they were imparting. So that's Institute for Behavior Training. It's ibehaviortraining.com. Okay, we should take a short break, and then we're going to come back. We have some follow-up questions about last week, you talking about the new criteria, and some questions about skills, actually. So we're going to come back with those after these messages. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. Our very special guest, Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, is here answering your questions. You still have time. You can be writing them in. We have a bunch of questions, but that's okay. We store them for future dates. In any case, a follow-up question from last week. Somebody wants to know, does an IQ score have anything to do with the new DSM-V when it comes to diagnosis?
You know, and that's a really good question. Gosh, the only place that it will come in is that it becomes one of the sort of specifiers or modifiers, and you can say, you know, ASD with intellectual disability or something like that. But it doesn't have anything to do with the actual diagnosis itself. And in fact, what's very important is that in California, we were having a situation gradually where insurance companies were reducing funding for our children who had delayed IQ scores or low IQ scores. And we were battling that for a long time, because people don't realize that our kids, yes, clearly some of them have some delays in intelligence, but most of our kids just score delayed on a test, and that's because most of the tests are verbal, like we're giving verbal instructions and we're expecting verbal responses. So I don't know how our kids are expected to respond to that. If they could respond to that, then they wouldn't have any language issues, you know. So the tests are not appropriate. So, and it always shocks me when I have a child who's tested somewhere with a verbal IQ test, and then they come in here and we give them a nonverbal IQ test, the test that you use for hearing impaired kids, and then their IQ is like 50 points higher, you know. So it tells you that the administration of an IQ test is not really appropriate for our kids. So then what happened recently here was we had a lot of cases in California where the parents were the case was getting cut, the funding, due to a low IQ. And we were sending all these, and a lot of other people were too, parents were sending these to Department of Insurance, Department of Mental Health Care. And they came back with an emergency sort of notice for California, which I'm pretty sure would be everywhere, to the insurance companies saying you cannot use IQ as a reason to reduce funding, which I think is awesome. I mean, I really think that's very good. And so don't worry about IQ. IQ is permeable. It changes with what you learn. So that's a really, really important thing to remember.
Awesome. Great question here. Dr. Doreen, have you ever thought of putting skills out there as an app for the iPad, thinking it might be helpful when you don't have access to a computer? Because a lot of people now are moving from their computers to their pads. Is that something that is under consideration?
Well, so what we have right now, and I really appreciate that feedback actually, and if the person who's writing hopefully is listening to this as well, if you have any further ideas about how that would work, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please feel free to email me about that.
Okay.
And I always say my email is doreen@centerforautism.com, so I have no problem. I love receiving emails from parents instead of my 400 management emails that I receive every day. So,
all right.
But what I wanted to say is that for our own system, our therapists internally at CARD have iPads, and their iPads do a variety of different things, including capture data. And we're just in the phase of we keep rolling out new features to the iPads, and some of our therapists now already are using the data collection feature, which is terrific. I love it. So it captures sort of correct response to various programs, as well as behaviors, frequency of behaviors, and those come from and feed into skills. So let's say you are using skills and you pick a series of lessons for your child. In our internal card system, when a supervisor picks lessons, it'll automatically be fed to the iPads of the therapists for that child.
That's amazing.
So the therapist receives the new information automatically, is taking data on it, and then when they put new data in, it feeds back into the child's skills program. So internally, what we're doing with skills is expanding it more and more so that it just becomes our clinical database overall, because all of our kids are in there and all of our kids have data in there. We're adding a lot of features to skills, like now we have a specific type of report for every funding agency, which is going to be awesome.
Right.
And it's automatically generated from the child's data, so it reduces the supervisor's time. And it also now, of course, some people will be familiar with this section we have called the BIP Builder, and that's sort of you answer a bunch of, and actually they just finished the functional assessment, or the functional analysis, descriptive functional analysis. So it asks you a bunch of questions as a parent about behaviors, and you answer those, and then it'll tell you what the function of the behavior is, and then it'll take you to the BIP Builder, and the BIP Builder will tell you how to deal with it.
Every school needs to have that. Every school needs to have that.
I agree, totally. But so it's too big of a system. I mean, I think skills itself, and I'll have to find out, but I think skills itself should be programmed in a way that's visible on the iPad. In fact, I know it is, because when we have our iPads, we always have skills, and we can see the graphs and everything on skills. But in terms of turning it into smaller apps, I'd have to really give some thought as to how that would happen. I think I shared on this show a few times that I really want to start. We actually are just about to do this. I mean, you know that we're building games. That's one thing. We have a couple of hundred games in the works right now, where we're building games that would correlate to skills, and hopefully those will help our kids as well. But one of the things I want to do is I want to get sort of a list of exactly what this parent writes, kind of urgent situations that parents need help, and try to develop applications for that, so that parents can know exactly how to deal with behaviors. Most of the time parents have a very hard time in public. So it's just, I need to kind of get a better understanding of what the need is, and then we'll try to design games and apps and so on.
I love when, because there's so many times in the community where people say, why doesn't somebody do this?
Right.
But I know you have said, tell me when that question comes up. And the same thing with Autism Research Group. Dr. Jonathan Tarbox says, tell us. What research do you want to see done? This is what drives the conversation. So instead of just saying those things quietly in our living room and being frustrated, write in and tell us those things. We'll make sure that they get to the right people.
Absolutely. Please do, because it's your ideas. I mean, what we want to do here is we don't want to produce stuff that we think is good. We want to produce stuff that is useful to you as a parent. So,
so
please
think about,
let us
what
know.
do you need? What do you need? People want to know what you need.
Absolutely. Or, I mean, here's another thing that I often wonder, and I wish I just had access to hundreds of parents that could tell me, would it be useful to have just an around-the-clock 800 person available, who we have to have some availability for, because we have insurance coverage for our kids. My question is, would this be something that parents would use, is just sort of a number where you call in and you, something very similar to this, but around the clock, where you're in an urgent situation, if you, and especially if you are already a card patient, or have established some sort of patient-doctor relationship with us, then we can certainly assist you on the phone and tell you exactly what to do.
Well, we've been getting ready to do a survey of our viewers, and maybe we can throw some of those questions in for you. And
what are the things that you need?
What do you need? What do you need? I love that. Isn't it great when somebody asks you, what do you need? Because then you have to sit and think, okay, actually, you know, what I need is this. And that's a very freeing thing. Okay, another question here that we've had a bunch of people around this question, but this specific one is, what do you do when your insurance says your child only needs 12 hours a week of therapy when you know they need more like 25 hours? Right. And of course, the numbers change. Some people write in and say, we've got 8 hours and I know we need 40. But, you know, in general, what do you suggest when the insurance company is saying, and you mentioned earlier, we can get our assessments under our insurance, but sometimes that's tied to the funding. And a lot of people, we should say, are getting great assessment through their insurance company, but every once in a while somebody's saying, I think it's low. What do you recommend in those circumstances?
Well, first of all, the person that does your assessment is going to be most likely a licensed psychologist. And if they're a licensed psychologist, that means nothing in relation to their ability to make a recommendation about ABA. ABA is pretty much the only thing that's approved by insurance.
Right.
So what you need to do, and the only reason we do it is because we're both, right? I'm a licensed psychologist, I do testing, and I'm also board certified, so I do, my expertise is in both, but it's unusual. So what you would have to do is you go to a licensed psychologist or an assessment center where you get all the testing done. You take that test to an ABA professional. Hopefully they have the ability to kind of understand that test, and then they communicate with the psychologist or with the, you also need a sort of a referral form or a prescription, which the psychologist can give you, or a psychiatrist, neurologist, developmental pediatrician. Developmental pediatricians also are going to be doing all those tests too. And in some ways you'll get other tests done by a developmental pediatrician, which is very good too. But the point is that really the person making recommendations in terms of ABA should be an expert in ABA. Because if you take it to a psychiatrist, let's say, I mean, I just did it a few years ago, I published a paper for psychiatrists about ABA, right? And it was in the, I don't remember the name of the journal, like the journal for the American Academy of Clinical Psychiatry, right? And we published this journal about what is ABA, and it became like the #1 journal. I got a whole ton of awards for it, just because, excuse me, like the medical field doesn't know what ABA is. They're not trained in it, they don't understand it. And for anyone to just imagine, oh my God, am I going to refer a service that actually could last 3 to 4 years at the intensity of 40 hours a week, is beyond their imagination. So what they will tend to recommend is something like 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, which is ineffective almost. It's almost like saying, you know, you are on a medication where the dose has to be 30 milligrams and you're doing 5. It's not going to work. In fact, it's going to make you resistant to the correct dose. So you need to make sure you're dealing with an ABA professional in the mix who can give you the correct recommendation. Now the problem is, at your insurance company, they will have BCBAs, board certified behavior analysts, who will be arguing and saying, oh, 12 hours is enough. Unfortunately, there are a lot of BCBAs out there who also don't really understand that it has to be intensive up to a certain age. So
because BCBA doesn't necessarily mean you have experience with autism, correct?
Right. And, you know, I mean, even now these days, they try to, a lot of the elective courses that you take to get your BCBA, you have the option of taking courses in autism. But the truth is, and no disrespect to the field or people who've worked very hard to get their board certification, but, you know, when we hire board certified behavior analysts, they go through easily 6 months of training with us before they're even allowed to go solo, because it's a different thing. Like, you really just are learning the techniques. You're not learning how to implement these techniques with children and in what relationship and how and like
well, I think any professional field, I mean, even if we were talking about welders, you know, you have specialization, you know, so if you're somebody who welds and you weld a particular kind of steel, that doesn't mean that you necessarily can do another kind of steel underwater.
Absolutely right.
It doesn't mean that you're not a great welder of that thing that you were doing, but this is a specialty.
Right. I mean, and if you just think about this, Shannon, like, I still struggle to train because we have a lot of BCBAs here, like, I don't know, maybe 120, 30, 40, something like that, growing all the time. And it's very hard for me. I struggle because I'm constantly trying to train them also on understanding the medical aspects. You know, I will often have dialogue with my supervisors and say, how do you not know the dosage of a particular medication? Don't you realize how much that impacts the child's behavior?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just, you know, something very important. But to go back and to say, what do? You appeal the decision. You appeal the decision, and this is critical. The appeal process is somewhat of a joke right now. So what happens is you will, there's an appeal procedure on your insurance company's website. You follow that procedure, you send an appeal, and what happens is the insurance company will contact the provider who made the recommendation. Now, if the, and you will then have a provider who's either going to be on their side or on your side.
Right.
So you need to make sure you have a provider who's willing to at least go to bat for you.
Right.
Now, we do this daily. In fact, we have a senior supervisor whose job it is just to do this.
Right.
Peer-to-peer reviews, seriously. And it's terrible because the physicians, most of the time you have a physician who's doing a peer-to-peer with you and they don't have, it doesn't even matter that they have no understanding. They come to the game with the intention of just blocking your hours, right? So, I mean, I've had discussions where the physician has said, I don't know why I should even attempt this, or this child has had enough progress. What is enough progress? Right. Or the child hasn't had enough progress. You know, so it's either enough or not enough, but they won't listen. And like, oh, it seems like this child needs medication. I was like, have you read the report? This child is on medication. Oh, but I think the child needs an SSRI. Have you looked at the report? The child's on an SSRI. I mean, they don't really care. So it's a difficult process. But if you can, and I know parents are so overloaded as it is, if you can, just continue the appeal process to the point where you get to whoever's responsible, whether it's the Department of Insurance or the Department of Mental Health Care, Managed Health Care. Now, let me tell you, those two do respond. When you get to the level of DMHC or Department of Insurance, they're on your side. And they're amazing. Like, some of the changes that we've gotten just because we've elevated cases to that level are just astonishing.
And I always remind parents that, you know, we have a lot to do and it's very overwhelming, but job number one is to advocate for our child, because the one thing I'm sure of is that if we don't, we won't get anybody else to.
Right. I mean, and honestly, if you're with CARD, let me tell you, it's part of the process here. Like, we have an entire department, which is AIN, our Autism Insurance Network department, and that's all they do, is just fight for hours for our kids, because we want to make sure we get enough hours for our kids.
And that brings up a really good point that, you know, as you said, make sure that you're working with an ABA provider that's going to go to bat. Surround yourself with people who are going to see it the way you do. Your child, that this is important. It's not just important, it's necessity, that you're gonna do whatever you have to do. You're gonna get around whatever obstacle that you have to do, and that you surround yourself with those people, because you will consistently meet people who say that's just not gonna happen.
Right.
And you can't give in to that.
That's right, exactly. Two other resources for this family and any other family who's having this kind of issue. Go on your insurance's website. They always have a series of, I guess they're called treatment protocols or treatment guidelines or something like the ABA treatment guidelines. Print those. Keep those. Like, we had an insurance company that wasn't funding our kids if they were in school. and because they considered school to be part of it too. And I was like, I had a lot of dialogue with them around this, and they realized no, school has nothing to do with ABA necessarily. And then when you look at their treatment guidelines, even in there, it says like ABA has to be provided in multiple environments that the child is, such as school. So you need to read that,
right,
because in there you might find some things that will help you.
Yeah.
The other thing that you need to read is go on the Behavior Analysis Certification Board.org, BACB.org, and on there there's a series of guidelines for ABA, like the frequency, amount, ratio, supervision, etc. And it kind of defines it as early intensive behavior interventions, so young children, and then more focused interventions. But it gives you kind of a history of and science behind how many hours one or the other should have. So you then have some documentation in terms of what you're asking for.
Okay, great. We're going to take one more short break and come back. We've got some people asking about books that you would recommend about ABA and for families starting out. We have 2 different questions about that. So stick with us. More with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh after these messages. Welcome back to Autism Live. Our very special guest for Ask Dr. Doreen is Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, a true expert in the field of autism. And so thrilled to have you here. We've had 2 different questions that came in. The first one, somebody wants to know if what's a book that you would recommend for families just starting out, and the second one was about, is there a book that you recommend having to do with ABA and with behavioral interventions for children? Yeah. So what do you think?
So, you know, there's different books. There's so many books. I don't know which would pertain to what, but we were earlier talking about this book. This is the book Overcoming Autism, which was authored by Lynn Cagle and Claire Lazebnik. And they write about ABA, but in here they're calling it pivotal response, PRT. PRT is a form of ABA. So, or it's actually, I would say, even go beyond that and say it's a part of the ABA that we do. So it's not, you know, for instance, in pure ABA language, when you are trying to get a child to begin speaking, for instance, as an example, what we call it man training. And man training is, and that's more of sort of a Skinnerian language or verbal behavior language. And man training is essentially you want the child to vocalize whatever it is they are passionate about or really want, which is a request. And when they do vocalize, and you use various techniques to get them to vocalize that, and when they do vocalize that, you make sure they get that. And that's a very concise example of what pivotal response training is. Pivotal response basically says, use the things that are extremely motivating to the child. And you can do that. At some point, you kind of need to go a little bit beyond that, and if you don't, this is my opinion, if you don't, things slow down a little bit, because your child's interests may not necessarily be the things you want them to be interested in. So in our form of training, although everything in the beginning is pivotal response, we tend to start to barter. You know, like, okay, I'll give you this, but you have to do this, right. You know. But so this is a good book, Overcoming Autism. I think the Kegels have good books on pivotal response, others as well, other books. About, you know, there are some books that are story type that will kind of guide you through the life of someone, and those are not bad for when you're starting out, because I think it's so overwhelming when you start out that it's nice to kind of go through someone else's story.
And I was saying during the break that the first 2 books that were handed to me by somebody who was a client here at CARD, a mom that I ran into that I always attribute, you know, to saving our lives, because that's how we found CARD. She handed me this book and A Real Boy by Christina Adams.
Right, right.
And of course you're familiar with Christina Adams because her son was being treated here at CARD.
Right, and Christina is a very wonderful writer. In fact, a lot of people have told me that that's their favorite book.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a great book.
And I was saying to you that, you know, we were given both of these books, and this was a great book and very instrumental in helping us along the road. But A Real Boy is really the one that did it for us, because it was delivered in a manner that I could hear
relate to. And
when I was overwhelmed and underslept, and I could really get into the story of what happened.
Right. Well, and I don't know if you've read, but you know, the very, very first book, this is years ago, that came out, and I would say was more influential in our field than even, you know, I always refer to the sort of the seminal study in our field was the 1987 Lovas article, which showed that kids with autism can recover. Well, one of the moms around the same time wrote a book, which was her story, and that's Let Me Hear Your Voice.
You know, and I have not read that. Has sat on my end table for I don't know how many years.
Right.
But I didn't realize that she was in the original Lova study.
She wasn't in the original Lova study.
Okay.
She wasn't. She actually was someone who contacted us almost the day after the Lova study came out, and then I ran their programs on the East Coast, and but she went through it twice. So she had 2 children who were diagnosed, and she went through it, and both did extremely well. And so. And her name is Catherine Maurice, or her pen name is, and she, from, you know, for a very, very long time, I would say that was the best book I've ever read. Okay. I mean, it was a fabulous book. It is a fabulous book. I'm not, you know, things have developed quite a bit since then. It's a little bit older, and there's a lot more that you can do.
Yeah.
But it was a fabulous book.
Yeah.
And so that's another one that's a really good story. And then it does guide you. And there's a lot of books that are sort of intended to guide new parents. We're in the process of writing the card book, and you know what? Our deadline is the end of this year. So by the end of this year, we'll have a book out.
That's wonderful.
And that's going to be a pretty. It's a huge book. Like, let me see, how many pages is this? Like. Yeah, this is like about 250 pages, and ours is about 600. So it's going to be a pretty big book. And it's, but it's chapter by chapter, and it will go through everything we believe at CARD. And it's hard because, you know, obviously, so to have everything from our visual programs to our how we get verbal language to go to self-care to you name it. It's a lot of stuff in there, and it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm editing it, so it's a little bit hard. So
I'm so looking forward to it, though.
And then the other thing I would suggest is these days, everything is online rather than, you know, in a book. So in some, there's part of me that wants to say, you know, get on our website, start looking around our website. A lot of parents tell me it's a very good place to start when you're just starting out.
Yeah.
And we're just about to put together, I think that'll be another 3 months or so, and we'll put out sort of a parent's manual getting started in autism.
Lovely.
And that'll kind of tell you everything you're supposed to do.
Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful thing. Fabulous. We've got a lengthy question that has come in just now. Hello, Dr. Doreen. Thanks for sharing your time in such a noble cause. I have a question. My daughter's 6, currently receives 1 hour per week of ABA therapy. We know she needs more. We use skills, but we know that this is not enough because we work and have limited time to do this. And it really depends on how much time you put into it, right? And how much time you have to put in it. They want to know, how do the remote sessions work, or who do I contact to get training or certification that you referred earlier? I live in a small town, no providers, and the ones available are super booked and on a waiting list. They continue to write, we love skills and have bought some of the IBT videos, but again, time is what our biggest concern is. She's extremely smart. Some therapists have said that she has savant characteristics. She is slightly verbal with prompt only, and compliance is an issue, and issue is in all caps. She likes to do her stereotypical things, and huge tantrums are often when we redirect her. So most is done with physical prompt. She needs the intensive ABA, which is our missing puzzle. Thank you so much.
Sure.
A lot of things in there.
Yeah, but you know, the primary thing in there is that don't even stress yourself if you're doing 1 hour of ABA. Don't do it. It's just going to be more stressful for you, more stressful for her. We need to get you into an intensive program. I don't know where you live. I'm assuming you're in a state that potentially has coverage. I hope you do. One of the things I would suggest you do is, and anyone can do this. I mean, this is very easy actually. Go on the website for Autism Votes, which is sort of the Autism Speaks website that updates all the information about insurance mandates in various states. So let's hope you're in an insurance state.
Autismvotes.org.
Correct. And then once we establish that you're in the state that has insurance, and if you're not, it's going to be a lot harder, because then we're looking at possibilities for other sources of funding.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would still be able, if you're not, then I would still ask you to write in to CARD at our website and go to remote services and write to the person who's in charge of remote services, or the coordinator. That would be Morva, or the person who's in charge is John Galley. And they would both be happy to give you a lot of information. But let's assume you are covered, your state is covered, and then we have to check your policy. And most of the policies, if you or your husband work for an employer over 50, will have this coverage. And if they don't have the coverage, we can tell you how to get your HR department to get that coverage. It's not costly at all. And then once you get and the way we help you with that is, once you go through Morva, you will give us your insurance information. Morva then goes to our contracts department, and we have a wonderful director in our contracts department.
Goodness, yes.
Let me tell you, her word is gold. If she looks at your thing and says you have coverage, and your insurance company says you don't, she'll win. Trust me, she will win. So we will identify your coverage. If you have coverage, you're set, because then all you do is you go back to, then Bryce, who's in charge of contracts, will tell Morva, who runs the coordination of all remote services, and then we will get in touch with you, send out information that, like, you're already on skills, so you've already filled out the assessment, and we get you started. And that means you get assigned a supervisor. The supervisor, we will pick based on your child's characteristics and also based on where you live, so that we can have frequent access. And that's it. The supervisor starts coming out to you and will hire people in your area, and we will train them so that they become our employees and they're trained, because that's the only way we can get insurance coverage for you. And then they will work with your child, and the supervisor will tell them exactly what to do, because now they're trained and all they really need is sort of the curriculum and the skills and so on. But the supervisor monitors them, and we make recommendations. We get definitely more than 1 hour a week. We'll be, you know, your child's 6, so you're still within the window where we can request a high number of hours, somewhere between 25 and 40.
She says she's in Florida, Cape Coral City.
Oh yeah, that's going to be very easy to deal with. I mean, Florida is a very, not only a state that gives a lot of funding, but a state that understands ABA very well. So yeah, we can definitely do that. And depending on how close you are to, like, the, as I said, the first office we're opening in the south east is going to be Baton Rouge in a few weeks, in a few months, and then from there our director of a sort of expansion is Dr. Catherine Minch, Cat Minch, and she will be working with a lot of different locations, cities in the south, and trying to open and expand fast, so we actually have card services near you. But
she wrote in and said, I'm sorry, could you tell me the website or number to contact? I have both my husband and I have insurance, and she is with Medicaid. So I'm going to ask Emily if she'll put up the 800 number there on the screen for you. And you can also visit www.centerforautism.com.
Right.
So there's the phone number right there on your screen, 855-345-CARD, which translates to 2273. That's a toll-free number. When you call that number, who you get on the other end of the line is Amy.
Oh, that's right.
And
Amy.
tell Amy that Dr. Doreen and Shannon sent you.
Yeah.
And Amy is one of the best people on the planet, truly. So I love being able to say that you're not going to get pushed aside to some, phone tree, some crazy phone tree.
Amy now has an assistant, because she does 24/7. She's on that phone all the time, and so we've
cloned Amy.
That's right.
And which is a good thing.
That's right. But all you'll ask for is to talk to remote services.
Okay.
And that will be Morva, M-O-R-V-A is her name, and you'll go to Morva, and then you'll get this whole process started, and you'll say, this is where I am. Dr. Doreen said I need remote services. this is my insurance information. Morva will take it from there.
Okay, so really exciting.
I'm very glad that you were listening. Like,
yes, and then you could write back and say where you are, because that kind of help, and that's what the live feature is for. We love it when it works.
And just so you know, the portion that tends to be a little bit difficult for us to convince the insurance companies is sort of the cost of travel, and when we start sending supervisors over there, because you'll have our supervisor there pretty fast and like pretty frequent as well. And some of the insurance companies completely get it and they're very on board with this, and others we sort of have to negotiate with them a little bit. And so if anything, any cost that might come to you, Morva will set it up and do the best she can with this, but the cost that you might become partially responsible for is just the travel of the supervisor. Because the staff will be local to you and will help you, we'll hire them.
Okay, absolutely fabulous. It's so exciting when those kinds of things work out. Emily, do we have time for one short question or no? I'm sorry? Short question. I don't know that this is a short question. My 8-year-old son's handwriting is horrible. I don't know whether to work on that with hand skills or teach him how to type. Like, where do you go when they're 8?
He will need both. So it depends on the reason that you're doing this. In other words, if it's for schoolwork, then you got to work on the handwriting. If it's for the purposes of communication, then I would go to typing. But he will need both. Ultimately, I mean, the concept is you really just need. And what is that program? What is it? Handwriting without tears?
That's the big popular one right now in schools.
Yeah, a lot of people use that. We've used that. It's not a bad program at all. Actually, it'll help. And again, this is a fine motor issue, so you might want to make sure that his other aspects of his fine motor have developed.
So maybe check with the OT, what's working on.
Right, and there's a lot of practice exercises and strengthening exercises that we would do, for instance, in order to make sure the child's able to like have enough pressure, hold correctly, and that sort of thing.
We've done some little snippets on the show before about OT things to do to improve the grasp, the tripod grasp, like those push pin art things that they do. They put the kids on the carpet and any kind of design, and they have to push the pin through to the carpet, and then they can hold it up to the light. It's very reinforcing to them.
That's right.
Things like having the broken crayons. They break the crayons so that they're so small that the only way they can hold them is with the tripod grasp. Lots of different things, and we've covered a lot of those on the show before. You can search that topic.